So, when the United States and India announce a major trade deal, you'd probably expect a lot of fanfare and celebration, right? Well, instead, what we got were two totally different stories. One country called it historic, while the other was, well, a little more cautious. So, what is actually going on here? And that brings us to the big question, the real puzzle of this whole situation. The US is out there hailing a historic agreement, but India's reaction feels kind of uncomfortable. How can two countries sign the exact same deal and see it in such completely different ways? To get to the bottom of all this confusion, we've got to start with the first version of the story, the one that came straight from the White House. Let's break down exactly what the United States put out there. So, what really kicked this all off was when the White House released these documents they called fact sheets. And they didn't just announce a deal, no, they framed it as this huge landmark achievement, setting a really positive and, definitive tone right out of the gate. Now, if you look at the specifics from the US point of view, it sounds amazing. They're claiming India agreed to get rid of non-tariff barriers, which has always been a really sticky issue. They're also talking up a big boost in tech trade, more cooperation, and even a roadmap for a bigger deal later on. Honestly, to anyone just reading this, it looks like a massive win for the US. But of course, that's only one side of the coin. Because as soon as this super optimistic version came out, a very, very different story started coming out of India. So let's switch gears and look at their side. India's response was, well, it was fast and pretty blunt. Officials basically told everyone to just disregard those American fact sheets. Their position was crystal clear. The only piece of paper that actually matters here is the official joint statement that both countries signed off on. And this slide just lays it all out perfectly. You can see the conflict right here. On one side, you have the US version, a whole list of specific wins, and a clear path forward. And on the other side, you've got India's official stance. Nope, the joint statement is the only guide, and nothing is really finalized. In fact, they're pointing all the way to March 2025 before we'll even have a clear interim deal. So what gives? Why this huge disconnect? Why would the US put out such a detailed fact sheet if India is saying it's not the full story? Well, Indian officials, they have a theory, and it has less to do with international trade and a lot more to do with politics. And here we have it. A direct quote from senior Indian officials that really gets to the heart of their thinking. This has been done entirely because of domestic politics. In other words, from their point of view, those US fact sheets weren't really for an international audience. They were for American voters back home. Okay, so let's cut through all the noise for a second. With these two conflicting stories flying around, what is the actual official path forward? What did both sides really agree to do next? Well, if we look at that joint statement, the one document India says actually counts, it lays out a pretty clear three-step process. First, they're going to keep negotiating on all the tough stuff. Second, they'll try to finalize an interim deal. And finally, way down the road, they'll work towards a big, comprehensive trade agreement. So, as you can see, this thing is far, far from over. This whole episode really leaves us with a bigger and pretty fascinating question. In a world that's so connected, where domestic politics can be so intense, are these big international agreements becoming less about quiet diplomacy and more about loud, public political messaging? It's a really important thing to think about as we watch how all this unfolds on the world stage.